All right, well, thanks for coming to my session today. Today I'm going to talk to you about PowerApps and IoT. And this is a really cool session. I think it has a really nice demo in it. And the nice part is all the code is available for you afterwards. So you can stand this up in your own environment in about 20 minutes. So before we get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Todd Baginski. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and my company is called Canvas. I work a lot with the PowerApps team. I work on SharePoint a lot, Office 365, and Azure. And lately, I've been building a lot of IoT solutions. And so this is how you can build PowerApps as your front end for an IoT solution. The topics that I have here today are I'm going to give you a demo of my IoT PowerApp Taxi Fleet Command Center app. And then after that, I'm going to walk you through the architecture and show you all the pieces behind it that make it work. So with that in mind, let's start on our demos. Is anybody here working on IoT solutions right now? A couple people are. Anybody here working on PowerApps? Right on, right on. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is a data set that I have of IoT data. It's not actually real-time data. I don't have enough capability to show that to you today, but what I do have is a data source that Microsoft captured for us. A few years back, they captured data of taxis driving around Beijing, China, and they captured a whole bunch of that data, and so that's the data set that I chose to use in this particular example. So my data that I got from Microsoft sits inside of all these little text files, and each text file correlates to one taxi. So I'm going to start a simple console application here, and the only job that this console application has is to read through the text files and pretend it's real taxis emitting this data, and it's throwing it at my IoT Event Hub inside of Azure, so I pull the data into the system. So every time you see a dot, that means that data is being written to the IoT Event Hub in Azure. I'm writing this data at 6 times the speed these taxis actually drove around because it allows you to see them move a little quicker in the demo, and it allows me to demonstrate some use cases as well. So let's move over to our PowerApp here, and I'm going to start it up and tell it to go get my data. And every 5 seconds, my PowerApp is pulling Azure Table Storage, where I'm eventually landing that data coming from those text files going into Azure. And you can see that the different taxis are represented with the green dots on the map. If it has a green dot, it means that taxi is in good shape and no maintenance needs to be done. If it is yellow, or pardon me, orange, that means that the taxi has gone over 4,000 miles since its last oil change, and the oil needs to be changed. We can see this one right down here at the bottom, 3557, this taxi, and you can see in the zoom on when I click it, if you watch that image on the right, you'll see it refresh every 5 seconds. You'll actually be able to watch that taxi drive around Beijing there. When it's red, it means that the taxi's gone 5,000 miles without an oil change before. And when any of these conditions happen, back here in my email, you'll notice the timestamp on the email, that's right now. I've also got some things going on that you would do in a standard IoT operation to basically tell you when something's going wrong and you need to know about it. So these are email notifications. And every time a taxi crosses that threshold of 4,000 or 5,000 miles, an email is sent to let me know that that happened. So back inside of my PowerApp here, you can see because I've cranked it up to 6 times the rate that these taxis actually drove around, there is a lot of them turning red and they need an oil change. So if I come back in here, I can see right now this taxi 1131 has about 8,000 miles that it's driven, and it needs an oil change. So as the maintenance manager, I can look at this dashboard I've built in the PowerApp here, and I can say, you know what? Well, I just changed taxis 1131's oil at 8,000 miles, and I'll save that. So when I come back to the page now, you can see that that threshold has not been exceeded since the last time it had its oil changed, and it turns green again on my map. So this gives you an idea of how you can build a real-world application that allows you to actually take action and visualize your IoT data inside of Azure or really any other IoT capability as well. Another thing that I have here is the ability to really select who the driver is for my taxi. So if I click Select Driver and I type in my name, for instance, it's going to return all the Todds who are in our Azure Active Directory. I can select myself there, and now I can see my picture, and I know I'm the driver. So just another little integration here to demonstrate how PowerApps so easily integrate with Office 365. I can pick from people, I can assign a person, and I can see their picture next to my taxi there as they all drive around. Using Bing Maps, you could use any mapping technology you want here. I've got the ability to turn on the aerial view with labels, or I can turn on the traffic and see what that looks like in Beijing. It's 1:11 a.m. in Beijing right now, so that's why we don't see a lot of traffic here. But if you look at this during peak hours, you can see, it updates just like you would expect any map to. I've also got the ability to zoom in on my map. Like if I click that plus button a couple times, you can see I'm now zooming in on the map and seeing more detail about it. I can pan around on my app here too, and then just click that circle and reset the entire thing as well. So that's what the taxi app looks like. What does everybody think? Did you think you could build something like that in PowerApps actually? Has anybody ever seen a PowerApp that looked like that before? Open anybody's eyes up a little bit on what you can develop with a PowerApp instead of just a form to submit some data. Sky's really the limit with this technology. Here I can see my Azure table storage. I've got two different tables that I'm working with inside of this solution. One of them is keeping track of the last time a taxi's oil was changed, as well as the last time a notification was sent out to alert somebody that the taxi needed its oil changed. And that one is this particular table right here. Inside of it, I can see the mileage. Here's that one I updated to 8,000. I have my ID of the taxi as my row key. And here I set the driver ID as well. I've got a timestamp for everything that I do. And here's the actual data that I flowed in through the IoT Event Hub. Essentially, what I'm flowing in here is I've got a latitude, I've got a longitude, I've got a taxi ID, and I have a timestamp. Those are the only 4 pieces of data that I really need to build this whole example. Now, if I come back and take a look inside of Microsoft Azure, and I look at the IoT Event Hub here, I can scroll down to the bottom of the page when it loads up, and here we can see right now, this is when I started pumping the data into it. So I've put 3.87K of messages since we started this session today here into the Event Hub Live. And you'll see a couple here earlier. This is when I was just making sure it was all working earlier today. So let's head back now to the slide deck for just a second and take a look at all the pieces of the puzzle and how this is actually built. On the left side, I've got my simulated taxis. That's in that dotted box on the left. So I have those taxi data files I talked about. And then I have my producer console application, which just goes through them and uploads the data to my IoT Event Hub. My IoT Event Hub is a piece that comes with Azure that allows me to basically take in IoT data at really high levels of scale and velocity. There's 2 things that happen when the data hits the IoT Event Hub. The first thing is Stream Analytics kicks off right here. Stream Analytics' job is to look at the data coming in, make decisions based on what it sees in the data, and forward it somewhere. In my case, in this example, I'm just forwarding all of the data that comes in from my Event Hub, and I'm putting it here into table storage, into that table called taxi data. That's the same one I just showed you in the Azure Storage Explorer where I showed all that data that was in. Then, to get it into my PowerApp, I wrote a custom connector. My custom connector allows me to invoke this Azure function, and this Azure function basically is querying those values that came in through the Event Hub, landed in table storage, and it's using a timestamp that the PowerApp keeps track of the last time it made its query. It's querying the highest or the most recent value for each taxi since the last time the query was made from the PowerApp. And so the PowerApp essentially is pulling the data every 5 seconds. And you saw that with the timer that I put in that application to illustrate when that happens. But there's a lot of other things happening here too, aren't there? In the top, I've got another Azure function which triggers every single time data goes into the Event Hub. And that Azure function runs some code, and one thing that piece of code does is it's going to get the last time the oil was changed for the taxi by invoking this Azure function right here called get last oil change. It's going to figure out if that taxi has exceeded its mileage on the last time it had its oil change and send either that warning or that critical email. And it's going to do that by calling a logic app. So I didn't even write the code to do the email. I just incorporate a logic app. And to allow that logic app to connect, I use an Office 365 API connection. So that authenticates the logic app to send the email through Outlook inside of Office 365. There's one more function I didn't talk about, and that's set last oil change. I wrapped the get last oil change and the set last oil change in my connector that I created for my PowerApp. That allowed me, when I went to that page to look at the data about my taxis, to see the last time their oil was changed, as well as to update it inside a table storage there. So let's take a look now and jump into a little bit of the components here behind the scenes in the last few minutes we have, and learn a little bit more about it. These are all the different components in Azure. Many of them we saw on the previous screen that support this. And if I dive here into my function app, this is where my different Azure functions are defined. And you'll see the same names here down the left side of the screen underneath the functions that I showed you in the diagram. These were written in C#. So here's an example of the get last oil change. It's just C# code going to connect to table storage and return me the data that tells me the last time the taxi's oil was changed. Everything else inside of here takes a long time to explain line by line, and we don't have that time. But like I said, all this code is completely available for you. I'm going to bounce over one more time and show you a couple things in the PowerApp. So in the PowerApp, so how do I call that function and get the data back from Azure? Well, I have that timer running, and here's my timer. And inside of my timer control, I have this particular method called onTimerEnd. This means every single time the timer gets to 5 seconds, run this code. And so this code right here is using, this is the name of my custom connector right here, PowerApp's table storage settings. I probably should have given a better name, but this is where I invoke get last oil change. This is where I return the taxi data for the last time, or the most recent taxi data since the last time I made a timestamp. So essentially, like I mentioned before, every 5 seconds, I go to say, hey, Azure, give me the latest data. The other thing that's interesting to look at in here is the Bing map. So I'm using Bing Map REST API to do this. And essentially, what I'm doing is just constructing a URL to that REST API. And then these different arguments down here at the bottom are turning the push pins on the map different colors based on if the oil is approaching a change or it's past the time it needs to be changed. All right, we'll come back here real quick. The last thing I want to show you is Is interesting to anybody? You think you'd like to install this sample on your own maybe and learn from it? All right, I'm glad to hear it because it's ready for you. You can go do it now. We put it in our GitHub repository. It gives you a walkthrough and everything you heard me say here, but then down at the bottom, the most important part, the deployment instructions. All you have to do is click this Deployed Azure button, fill out the form. It'll put it all in Azure for you. There's also some other steps you'll have to do afterward, but everything is 100% documented and all the code is right here, including that PowerApp. So I think if you've never done this before, you're not familiar with Azure, if you're kind of rookie to all this, I bet you within an hour you can still get it all up and running in your environment. All right, so to wrap things up here, what's next? Get the IoT solution. That's an easy URL to remember, aka.ms/taxi-IoT app. That goes right to our GitHub repository where you can download it. And if you'd like to connect with me about any of these Azure IoT or PowerApps topics, that would be great. So you can reach out to me at those places too. Thanks a lot for coming to my session today, and I hope you have an awesome rest of the conference.